I'm not gonna reveal anything to anyone. I know it's highly secretive, and it's highly secretive.
Yeah.
So, but I will say,
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Houston Ensemble podcast. We have a wonderful episode today. We are here with the amazing Josh Applebee. Josh Applebee is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, sound engineer in Houston, working at Wire Road Studios and other various places. I knew that he was superior when I saw him setting up a drum microphone setup at an album that we did, and he was having our good dear friend John Fontenot measure the distance of the mic to the cymbal to his arm to the other cymbal, etc. So Josh, thank you for coming.
Yeah, man, and thank you for the vote of confidence. That is high praise.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And before we even started, we had to do a tutorial in sound and mixing, and just really put me on the chopping block and teach me something. And it's always cool to learn stuff. And another thing is that I met Josh when I recorded an album with Troy Crea for the band Troycha, and the album came out so delicious and the sound was so good that I was like, holy crap, this is crazy. So that's that made a big impact on me, and it's very cool to meet somebody who can do all that.
some people can tell where this is going. Obviously, an album with Josh, as the engineer.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
But seriously, that's another thing, and obviously we'll talk about all sorts of different stuff. But
I'm intrigued.
Armin and I are in a band, the Houston Ensemble. So It's not only a podcast, it's also a band.
Right.
And just, in the past 2 months, we've just been busting out all sorts of original stuff. And eventually, here, probably, in the next couple months, are going to contact you, maybe set something up, try and record the original Houston Ensemble stuff. But for people who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am a record mixer and producer. I've been working in Houston this is my 18th year here in Houston. I grew up in Maine, went to school in Florida, crashed on a friend's couch here in Houston because he said there was a cool jazz scene, and I didn't want to stay in Maine and Florida, and I just haven't left yet.
Wow.
So fast forward 18 years, and I'm sitting here with you guys.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Now, you said there was a cool jazz scene here. Do you play? Because I don't remember.
Man, I make noise on a bunch of different things, typically for my production clients.
Okay.
I wouldn't say I play any instrument really well. I play it well enough to get a part down usually, but my preference is to hire guys who are really awesome at playing instruments and make records that way.
Okay.
But I mean, I started singing choir in school, and picked up a guitar around 13 or 14, and from there it just picked up bass, picked up drums, keyboards, hand percussion things.
Right.
Are you tired of the government trying to calcify your pineal gland and turn you into nothing more than a working zombie? Look no further, because the Houston Ensemble has now been sponsored by the amazing Epic Water Filters. Tell us what they do, Armin.
Epic Water Filter is the only true filtration system you need. All these other filtration systems skip out on so many terrible chemicals and minerals that are still in your water and that you should not be drinking.
Fluoride, chromium, lead, all these other things that you do not want in your water. We've got water bottles with filters on them. We've got home installation filters. We've even got pitchers. Right now you can get 20% off any of these items on epicwaterfilters.com if you use our discount code Houston Ensemble, all lowercase, one word.
That's Houston Ensemble, lowercase, one word, for 20% off your Epic Water Filter.
Yeah.
Keep on hitting this thing.
Feel if you want to adjust that at any point, feel free. Give us the lowdown on how you got involved, specifically engineering, mixing, to the point that you're at today at Wire Road.
So, I mean, my initial interest in recording came from playing in rock bands in high school and wanting to make myself sound good, and our band sound good. And we started on a 4-track cassette recorder. It's just 4 inputs. We'd have one mic for the drums, one for guitar, one for bass, and one for vocals, and that was it. And from there, it became, well, how do I make this recording sound more like what I'm hearing on the radio? A drummer that I was playing in a band with at the time was going to go to school in Florida at a place called Full Sail, and they have a really great recording program. They have a film program, media arts, and like video game design. They're in Orlando, Florida. Really great program. He was going to go there, and I was like, wait a minute, like, you're going to go learn how to make records and make a career out of this? I didn't even know that was a thing, And so I checked out the school and decided I was going to go down with him, and I just never looked back,
Wow.
So I went to school in Florida, crashed on a friend's couch here in Houston. I figured I'd stay for a year or two and then move on. But I got an internship at a studio called SugarHill Studios, SugarHill Recording Studios, which is one of the oldest I think it's the oldest continuously operating studio in the country.
Wow. Whoa.
There's a studio, Electro Voice, in San Francisco that started in like 1936, but they weren't continuously a studio. So SugarHill started in 1941 and has been a studio to this day. It's still up and running.
Whoa.
So I got an internship there, met a great group of people who became my friends and my family, and I learned a lot about making records. And about 9 months after I started my internship, I started making records there professionally. I would go to like open mics and meet bands and bring them back to the studio to make records.
Wow. Now, Wayne Donahue, is he the guy at was he an owner of SugarHill?
So when I started, it was Dan Workman, Rodney Myers, and Andy Bradley. And I think Rodney doesn't do studio stuff anymore, but Dan still does some studio stuff, and Andy is still doing studio stuff.
Okay.
Wayne Donahue, he owned a studio called Rivendell before my time here in Houston.
Okay.
70s, 80s maybe. Got out of it, swore he'd never get back into it, and then he got back into it by acquiring SugarHill at the end of 2017.
Okay, I see.
Because Bubba Hightower, who is really the guy who is operating it and owns it, he partnered up with Wayne to get it. Yeah.
Nah, yeah, I don't know a ton about that place. I just know him from Facebook.
Yeah, Wayne's great. He's a really good guy.
I recently met him while we were playing one day, and it was just, I was like, okay. But that's cool to know that Houston has that. Now, I've got a lot of questions.
Sure.
But I don't want to hog the mic, so I'm going to just go to Armin, and you just drive us a little bit.
I'm just going to think out loud. My introduction to SugarHill was I was playing at the Manil Park with an old friend, Lucas, who I met again because he moved back to...
What's Lucas' last name?
Aber? Lucas Aber, he guitar player. Always wore a hat like yours.
Swing guy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Used to play with Kelly Doyle.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
See, there you go. And so, one of you, I don't know if it was, maybe even it was, I swear it could have been you or somebody, some engineer from SugarHill heard us play. We're playing Django's Tiger by Django Reinhardt. And the guy was like, sweet, man. He liked it. He liked gypsy jazz, and he told us we should come through the studio. And that was in high school.
Oh, you were in high school?
For me, I was in high school, so I was like, man, I was 17.
Can I just interject really quickly before I forget? I just realized, since you said Kelly Doyle, this is so random.
Yeah.
I had a dream last night that you came back home here and said you had a gig with Kelly Doyle. And I was like,
that's it.
I was like, cool. And I don't even know. I just know of Kelly Doyle.
Wow,
so,
that's pure manifestation.
Yeah, he's a badass.
Yeah,
I know that. I've heard that.
Yeah.
And I've heard Armin talk about him, and that was, you just triggered that.
Sometimes Kelly and I, we play little duo guitar gigs, and it's a lot of fun. And actually, I gotta hit him up because it's time to play.
Yeah.
But anyway.
We just did a video for him at the Big Top. with him and Thomas Helton. You know,
Oh
Thomas Helton?
yeah. I've seen that.
It's super cool. Just, you know, they played, I think, maybe 2 songs and did a little video.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Now,
It's a small world.
one thing that Armin and I like to talk about a lot, and I think what we've found recently within this past year, is that Houston actually has an amazing music scene, or it has, you know, amazing musicians and a cool community and a lot of music in a lot of places. And I'm just curious what your perspective is on Houston comparatively to other places in the United States regarding music.
So,
and you can say anything you want. Doesn't have to agree with me.
I mean, Houston has amazing musicians. Musicians that have gone on to, you know, tour the world with all kinds of different acts. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is the churches. There's so many churches in town that pay a living wage for musicians.
Yeah.
And so they're playing consistently every week with really great players. And then also, there are a lot of great, like, corporate gigs. I call them corporate gigs, but, you know, bands will get put together, paid lots of money, and musicians can make a good living here because of that. So because of that, we have a lot of great players here in town. As far as musical artists, I think we have so much creativity. Houston is so diverse. And when I first got here, I felt like the scenes were very segregated and very separate. You know, it's so big. It's geographically so big that not everybody hangs out in the same place, you know. Around 2010, we started to see, like, the circles start to overlap and cool collaborations started to happen. And I feel like that is the case now, where you had these just really cool and interesting artists and acts come out of that. Houston hasn't typically supported their homegrown artists in a big way. And, you know, that's changed a little bit over the last 10 years. But it's something where there's still plenty of room to like, grow that, our hometown support. You know, and audiences tend to be very relaxed here as audience members compared to other cities, where you'll hear a lot of talking and whatnot at the show. People are here to hang out and be with people and see and be seen, and you know, the act will sometimes take a back seat to that.
I feel that.
You know, so I feel like that's a strike against Houston as a music city. But we have a lot of, like, really great things to support music here. It's just, you know, for whatever reason, it hasn't congealed into, you know,
what needs to
solid.
happen is the Masonic lodges need to support the musicians.
Oh, is that what it is?
They need to fund the musicians.
Yeah.
There's so much business in Houston.
Yeah.
There's oil tycoons in Houston. There's energy tycoons in Houston.
Medical's
Halliburton
real
is in
big.
Houston.
Space.
Yeah, NASA, Halliburton. I mean, I've personally known people at the highest level in some of these institutions, and I wonder to myself, I'm like, I know you guys have a lot of FU money, and I know you guys could use some entertainment.
Yeah, and, you know, people spend a lot of money on entertainment in Houston, but they're bringing in people from outside the city.
Right.
Big acts. The fine arts have, I think, a really good support system here in town.
Yeah.
But, like, all the indie acts and indie music, there's not really support for it. Like in Austin, you see a lot of support for
and
indie
let me tell you,
music.
The fine arts are heavily supported by the legacy institutions in Houston. And that's
they do
that's
great.
exactly what I'm trying to say. Is like the next step is for urban music. See, for example, there's the Houston Theater Ensemble Theater, right? And they definitely have a connection to that legacy system. And so now, if you imagine the jazz system joining that echelon, you know, we could have a renaissance in Houston. It could be the next center of music.
Yeah, agreed. You know, one thing I think Houston artists in general could get better at as well is just like understanding music as a business, and, you know, supply and demand. You know, how do we serve our customers, the audience? You know, how do we give them a show? How do we give them a product that they actually want to consume?
Yeah.
And then how do we make money around that? Like that's something I think Houston artists themselves, you know, the hip hop community has done it really well. The rock community has traditionally not done very well in that area. I think the jazz guys are really good at it as far as like live. I feel like the live jazz scene in Houston is pretty strong. But like just sort of like understanding business in general, if artists learned how to do that, they would do much better.
Yeah.
We had a hopeful moment. I had a hopeful moment, but I think we both did last Friday. We had our Houston Ensemble debut as like a group at Cezanne downtown at the new location, and it was packed, like totally packed. And when you were saying kind of the people maybe just going to be seen or people talking, thankfully we didn't have any of that.
Oh, that's
and I was
awesome.
so
Great,
appreciative.
amazing.
Everybody that we invited came out. A lot of people who come to see us frequently at all the other
Shouts
little venues.
out to Dolly.
Yeah.
She was just like, bravo, come on, bravo, bravo.
She was this was a person on our podcast at one point.
Nice.
And it was just really, touching to kind of see everybody come out, and we got to debut a bunch of the original music, and it was expensive to get in.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't know how expensive it was going to be, but it gave me a lot of hope, and that also is kind of another reason why we're like, okay, well, that went very well. Let's, probably take it to the next level, record something, do something else like that. And we work with all sorts of different people throughout Houston. Obviously, we have ourselves, and I think maybe you know Corey Wilson.
Yeah.
Corey's in the Houston Ensemble.
Yeah, I know him well.
And I remember, and when we told him we were doing something with you, unfortunately, I wanted him to be here and dropped the ball on inviting him to the podcast because we
Sorry, Corey.
rescheduled.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
That's really my bad. But yeah, we do stuff with different singers, etc. So I feel like there's a lot of hope, and we're just kind of seeing what goes on.
I've just noticed, just at the gig at Cezanne, the hunger in the people's eyes for music, for that energy.
Oh my god! Especially coming off COVID, though. Like,
Yeah.
Right, that's
like
what I'm saying.
that.
Yeah.
I mean that. I feel like that will be a significant change. It's already changed so much for music, live music in particular, that like when people come back to live music in a big way, it's going to be different.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And how it's different, like maybe you guys got a little taste of it.
And I think as also musicians coming out of this time period, talking with everybody in the community, we're trying to, value ourselves more.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of low-paying stuff, and it's hard because like we want to play.
Yeah.
We've loved to play, firstly and foremost, but we also have to literally pay rent, and a $50 gig ain't gonna do it.
No, for the whole band.
Yeah, for the whole band.
Man, one of the best lessons I learned was from my friend Chase Amblin, who I played in the band with for many years. He in turn learned it from another musician friend, but it's basically if you don't ask for what you're worth, you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
So like if you say yes to all the $50 gigs, people are gonna, when they have a $50 gig, they're gonna know like, hey, I'm gonna call this guy who always says yes.
Right.
Right.
Like quickly fill that slot. But if you say I'm not worth 50, I'm worth X number of dollars, you may not get that gig.
Yeah.
But they'll know next time when they have the $100 gig, $200 gig, whatever. They'll know like, okay, like I can call this guy now.
Yeah. The lethal combination is making a name for yourself as an individual who's good at what he does,
Mm-hmm.
and then having that leverage power, you start using it.
Yes.
Okay, you have it now, so you can actually negotiate. And I want people to understand that how many years has Chad been playing bass? How many years would you say?
10.
About 10 years, right? I'm passing 10 years myself for guitar. Wouldn't you say that this is one of the best times for your bass career?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, yes or not really? Yes?
No, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's exponential.
That's what I'm saying. So there is a thing about the 10-year mark. I know we've heard of that is it Maxwell? The author of Outliers.
Oh yeah.
Malcolm Gladwell.
Malcolm Gladwell, yeah. Malcolm Gladwell. So, there's a little bit of truth to that. But it only really happens if you're putting that energy, that input into it at all times.
I mean, there's definitely, like you said, if you arrive fresh and new on the scene and nobody knows who you are, you're not going to get offered paying gigs. Music is so much about networking, getting to know people, letting people hear what you do. I get questions weekly about how do I get into being a studio guitarist? How do I be a studio musician? And the truth is, I can't hire someone that I've never heard before. Unless they're highly recommended by a colleague that I trust, I can't hire someone I've never heard before, because that's just a wild variable.
Right.
Like I can't guarantee anything for my clients without knowing the player and knowing what they can do. And so getting into studio work is difficult in that way. The live scene may be the same way. I think the live scene, open mics are a great way for people to hear how you play. There are open jams every once in a while. And then also, like, as musicians, you just say, hey, like, come to my house and we'll jam for a bit. And then you hear what somebody does, Studio stuff is a little bit harder because recording is so different from playing live. Like playing in front of a bunch of people, feeding off their energy. There's a visual component of what the audience sees while everything is happening that is so different than nobody being able to see you. All they have is this microphone in front of you, and it kind of magnifies everything that goes into it, Like that, people can't see you. They can't, be in the room and feel the energy. There's no audience for you guys to get energy from. It's like it all comes from you and into that microphone. Totally different skill set. And so, like finding good studio musicians is really about just spending time with people and hearing how they play, you know.
And to go with that, I remember when I came to Houston, 4.5 years ago, when I was going to Rice, I was studying classical bass.
I didn't know that. When were you at Rice?
2016 to 2020.
I was at Shepherd School 2020 or 2007 to 2012. So I left before you got there. But
oh wow.
Yeah.
What were you studying? Tim Pitts and Paul. Tim Pitts primary, but Tim and Paul.
Yeah.
Paul Ellison.
Yeah, they're great. I worked on staff there. So I did all the student recitals, production for student recitals. Like the building, kind of nighttime management and stuff like that.
I'm surprised we didn't talk about that before.
I had no idea. Yeah.
But yeah, so when I was, in high school and coming out of high school, I was just totally classical, like as serious it gets for classical bass. And I was like, I'm going to be an orchestral bassist. And as you probably know now, Rice is the spot for orchestral bass playing.
That's what they do.
Or it's either that or Curtis Institute in Philadelphia. But when I got here, and this is to go with the live music thing, or the live scene, somebody in Cincinnati told me that I should go to Cafe 4212, which is that old jazz club. And so as a freshman, I started to walk there from the dorms, take the little train and walk there on Monday nights.
Yeah.
And my jazz stuff was not up to par, but it was decent enough that I could sit in. And I just kept going every week, and then building all these different relationships, and then just growing that over the years, and then like meeting all these different people, and eventually like Troy Crea is one of them. And
so real quick about Troy, his last name is pronounced Crea. I've known him for, I don't know, more than 5 years now, and I thought it was Cree.
It's like Crea. I almost feel like I'm pronouncing it wrong still, but I'm pretty sure it's Crea.
I know I'm totally wrong about this probably, but is it Greek? Any Greek in there?
No, he's totally Dutch.
He's Dutch.
And that's where he is right now. He's in the Netherlands right now.
So he's Dutch.
So what's fun too is Troy is out on a family, because he plays with this band that we play in a lot, and Troy's out on a family thing, and I don't know when he'll be back, but it'll probably be a while. So Armin's been playing with us, and Troy and Armin get along really well, and it's cool because they're both very different guitar players, and It'd probably be cool to have both play, which I keep saying. And it's a big community of people, but it's all good.
Yeah.
And so we just meet all these different people, and then like John Fontenot. I met John at Cafe 4212 when I was a freshman.
Yeah.
And that has grown, and then went on like an international thing with John and roomed with him for 3 months, like
cool.
as brothers. And it's just really interesting how everything pans out.
Yeah. I mean, and like, that goes back to networking. Like you went to 4212 and networked.
Yeah.
And now all these other opportunities have come up because of it.
Yeah, and now I feel like I was gonna go to grad school in New York last fall, but that's when COVID happened, and I was like, well, it doesn't make a ton of sense right now to go to New York, even New York specifically, just because of how closed it was compared to here.
The hot spot.
Yeah, so now I'm here and definitely gonna be here another year, just continuing different stuff. And I feel like it's just a cool city with a lot going on, and especially like, this podcast has been really cool. And we started this in the COVID era when I had to take a coffee shop job because there were no gigs or anything.
Yeah.
And this podcast has actually grown a lot. You may not think so because of this little area, but we've had Kurt Rosenwinkel, we've had Peter Bernstein, we've had some amazing singers, doctors. We had the president of Rice. We had David Lebron.
Oh, no kidding. That's
who
awesome.
Just sent out an email. I'm not sure if you heard this, but he's stepping down as of yesterday.
We also had some of the most internationally known doctors, Joseph Verone, who was
from
been
Houston.
on BBC, CNN, ABC, whatever, Fox, whatever, anything you can think of.
That's awesome.
And
like, how did these people like come to be on your podcast? I mean,
we're so sought after for some reason. No, I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
There's no magic trick. Everybody, I get this question a lot.
Yeah.
They're like, man, they must have so much money to pay these people and shit. And it's like, not even. Here's the deal. We're honest. We're sincere about how we approach people. It's like, I know Chad approached you and he had several conversations with you before we could even make this happen. But that's the idea. It's like, we're not we just want to have the right conversations. We're the Houston Ensemble. We got to make do by that name. That name means that we support Houston.
Yeah.
And we also want Houston to be known for various things. Like, I believe in this city, and I'll tell you, it's really the city sitting on a gold mine, of potential. So
I agree.
Yeah.
Now I have a totally kind of different question for you.
For sure.
Is there anything, just out of curiosity, are you working on anything right now at the studio that you're extra excited about? Or worked on recently or anything like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm always working on like 10 projects at once in various different stages. One project I'm kind of excited about is with my friend Aaron Rogers, who is also an entertainment attorney, should you guys ever need contracts looked over or drawn up. She is also a multi-instrumentalist. She studied clarinet in New Orleans, and I can't remember which school she went to.
Well,
and then she, came to University of Houston to get her lawyer degree, her JD. But she's played in all kinds of different bands, and she is working on her own solo project called National Pleasures. And it's just been a fun kind of collection of songs, and she's gotten all her friends to come in and play on them. I've been able to program and perform a few things on it. So I'm excited for that. We're going to finish, if we're not already finished mixing, we're going to finish mixing it this next month, and it'll get mastered in September probably, and then released at the end of the year. But I'm looking forward to that.
that's cool.
Yeah.
I like that. Now, that being said, just you said mastering and stuff like that. I actually want, if you're okay with it, to go into a little bit of nitty gritty about recording, because there are a lot of people who are musicians that watch this podcast at this point, because we've had a lot of cool musicians on.
Ask about how to record bass, and I want to know how to record guitar.
How do I record bass?
So I think it's
Upright bass.
right. I think it's important to always say the thing that makes great recordings is great songwriting and great performance. You guys as musicians probably already know that. But without that, audiences aren't going to be interested. They're not going to be engaged in your recording.
Right.
So once you got that down, once you have a great song, and really that's the most important part. You have a great song, and then you can perform it really well. You have to capture it. And how you capture it really determines on how you want to present it to the world. You can capture it just kind of raw, like, this is who we are and this is what we sound like, and we want to present it in our recording exactly like this, which is what we did with Troy's recording. Like that. There's no thrills or frills with his recording. It's just you guys playing together in a room, and we presented it, like that.
Yeah.
You can get more artistic with the recordings, and like the Beatles really kind of pioneered using the recording studio as an instrument and manipulating audio after recording it to make it sound like something else.
Right.
So you have to figure out before you set up a microphone, what do we want this thing to sound like? What is the end presentation going to be, and then capture it, for that. So I mean, with bass, if you have a great player, and you have great gear, you have a great bass, you have a great bass amp, you can capture it a couple of different ways. You can do a DI. You can do a mic on the bass amp if it's double bass or upright. You can use one microphone. You can use two microphones. You can, use three microphones and put one out in the room. It really depends on how do we want to present, this bass in this song.
Now, I've got and it's totally okay if you don't have the answer for this or whatever. There's a very special, and I'm only saying this because I play upright bass, a very special clip-on mic that is kind of the top of the line mic that they hook on to upright basses right now. Do you guys have that at Wire Road? I'm not actually sure what the name is, or do you have anything specific for upright bass at Wire Road?
No, so in recording needs are so different from live needs, right?
Yeah.
Live on stage, you don't want this big, massive microphone sitting in front of the bass. That might look kind of awkward, right?
Yeah.
You're also crammed on a stage with a bunch of other musicians. Whatever's on that stage is going to get in that microphone. Typically live, you'll see microphones pushed in real close to instruments to help get a little bit of isolation on them so you can then present it through a PA, right? But in recording, it's, you can close mic things that will achieve a certain presentation, but you can also back them off from the source and get some room sound, and that creates a lot of space in three-dimensional audio spectrum. So like I'll use a big tube mic in the studio on upright bass, which is not necessarily something that would work in a live situation because it does pick up such a wide pattern. It is a little more delicate, handling it in a live situation. It's more likely to get knocked over or fall over or, there are just a lot of problems that could happen with a big mic like that. So what's good for live is not necessarily good for the studio.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Now, were you a colleague of ours, Anthony Caceres, who's an upright bass player, was actually at Wire Road sometime recently. Were you on that at all?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. I was just, if you were, I would ask, but he just put out something that was very cool. But Armin, ask about guitar.
Yeah, I mean, the primary problem I have is that DI guitar pretty much always sounds like ass to me.
That is true.
And, there's like algorithmic plugins like Neural DSP and Helix and Fractal and whatever that whatever that other one is, but it just doesn't sound right to me. It just doesn't sound right. So the thing that I would probably want to know is, how do I get a rich, thick sound from a guitar?
So again, it starts with the player and the instrument.
Yeah.
Like if you like the sound of your instrument and you're playing,
Right.
then you can capture that.
Right.
And like with bass, I'll do a DI in the studio, but with guitars, I never do DIs. Like the only reason I would ever do that is if we were planning to reamp it later, which. I mean, when you're in a really nice studio like Wire Road, like there's no reason to reamp later, just capture it at the source. You know? If we were in a terrible acoustic environment, you know, capturing guitar, then I might DI it to reamp it later. But otherwise, I'm using mics and trying to capture the sound of the guitar. I don't know if you play acoustic or electric, but you know, you approach those in two different ways. And again, it depends on the song and the presentation. So if you have a really dense arrangement for like, you know, say a rock track or a pop track, I would probably just use one mic on an acoustic guitar. The SM7 is my favorite mic to use on acoustic guitar for a dense situation because it has a very narrow band in the mid-range that it captures really well. Like the low end and the high end, it doesn't capture the extremes. So it just kind of lets the guitar like sit, you know, right here in the mix in your presentation. But if it's going to be a solo guitar, or maybe guitar and voice, then I might use two mics. Or if it's guitar and voice and he's going to play and sing at the same time, I would maybe use two mics on guitar, one mic on voice, and then two room mics. Capturing the room sound does a lot to make a recording feel more real.
Gotcha.
Whereas if you just have like close mics on an instrument, you're getting a very specific sound. You know, it'd be like putting your ear on the instrument and listening an inch or two away. Nobody ever does that. That's not how we hear that instrument here in the room. You know?
Right.
So trying to capture it in a way that then lets us present it in the recording how we might hear it is the goal.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah. So what's your setup? What's your guitar setup?
So let's say right now, if I did a jazz album, I would have an arch top, a thick boy with a lot of resonance on her, and then I would go through kind of a jazz amp. And
what kind of amp?
It's the one that I like is called a Henriksen Jazz 312. It's a solid state plus tube amp kind of synthesis. And that guy I would go through a Fractal FX AX8 system, which is a multi-effects board, and then I would have a little bit of maybe compression, a little bit maybe parametric EQ, and that's about it. Maybe a little delay, that's about it. And I don't know if you heard of Panhandle Studios. It's a studio in Denton, Texas, a little north of Dallas, and probably the best guitar sound I've ever heard for jazz is from that studio. They managed to do a good job of capturing what I heard, and that's kind of the end goal, is to capture what I hear, but obviously then you'll cater it to the audience. But the first part would have to be the musician, because you know how musicians are. They're very emotional. If they don't like how they sound,
guitar players in particular,
you know what I mean, it's over. But yeah.
But yeah, you want a sound that not just that you like, but that you're familiar with out of the recording. Like if it doesn't sound like you, something is wrong.
Yeah.
I have a couple of different setups I like to do when a guitar amp is involved. Like kind of my go-to setup right now is 3 microphones. I'll close mic with a Sennheiser 421, a Neumann U87, and I'll set up a ribbon mic, back a little bit.
Gotcha.
And so with that, I can pan the 2 close mics left and right, and then the room mic slips up in the center to help, give it a little bit of dimension.
I see now. It's so clear.
And I mean, like that's worked for a presentation that I like. And for jazz, I think that could work really well.
Yeah.
If it's a rock track where they're gonna like layer a bunch of guitar takes, I might choose like 1 or 2 mics.
Right.
Because then I'd be panning different performances to the left and right, and depending on what they're doing. But yeah.
The distorted guitar, I find like DI is kind of safe. It could be safe, like multi-layering guitars, like in a metal track where you're gonna have 4 layers, 5 layers of guitar.
Yeah, it's interesting. Several years ago, like guitar amp simulators in the computer have come a long way.
Right.
Universal Audio makes an awesome one. Their Fender guitar amp right now sounds so good to me that sometimes I'll choose that over a real amp. Like when I'm recording my guitar at home. I have a Vox that I love Vox amps. But yeah, I'll use that little Fender. I can't remember what it is. It's a 55 Tweed, I think is what they modeled. And it sounds amazing. But several years ago, Logic has an orange amp plug-in. I think they just call it, orange. And it sounds great. And I was working on a sort of like a modern rock song, and the distortion that we got in the computer mixed with the real amp recorded, out in a room, like really allowed us to get a cool sound, kind of a high gain distortion that sounded really good in a way that the amp alone just didn't do. So I would agree with you that the high gain stuff, a DI can be really effective for that.
Yeah.
Let's say somebody listening is really into jazz and they're doing some home recording stuff. What would you say are some just overall tips to kind of get like a good, let's say it's like a quartet. Let's say we got upright bass, sax, guitar, and drums. What are some literal things that are going to give you kind of a jazz-oriented sound when it comes to mixing, levels, etc.?
So I feel like with jazz, when you're presenting jazz, that's like the type of recording where you're trying to capture what's happening in the room and present it as that. You're not necessarily going to get crazy with effects.
Right, yeah.
Unless it's like a new fusion thing, which can be really cool. But generally, you're just trying to capture the sound that's happening in the room. Saxophone, I would just set up one microphone for that. Upright bass, maybe one mic, maybe get a DI if you have a DI on your upright bass as well. And I always capture the DI on upright bass because especially when you're in a room all together, the drums can bleed a lot onto upright bass and it can be really hard to get some definition and distinction out of it. And the DI, you can just kind of sneak it in for a little definition sometimes. But if I'm in a big studio like Wire Road where I can isolate upright bass, I'll capture the DI, but then I'll never use it,
Okay.
But if you're at home, I would say capture it because it's there and then you can use it if you really need to. Drums, you could do a simple setup. Sort of a 3-mic setup could be all that you need.
Yeah.
Where you put a mic on the kit or the kick and then 2 overheads.
And 2 overheads.
Yep. I like to place my overheads the same distance away from the snare. And so you mentioned like with John where we were measuring the distance of the mics. Really, we were just doing that with the overheads and then a few of the room mics. So with the overheads, I'll take just a guitar cable or whatever cable's handy, set it at the center of the snare, measure to my first overhead, and then, bring it over to the other side of the kit and make that mic the same distance away.
Okay.
But I'm also trying to make each mic the same distance away from whatever the closest cymbals are. So if it's about a foot away from, a crash cymbal over here, I'll try to get this mic to be the same distance from the snare drum, but about a foot away from like the ride and crash that might be on the right-hand side. Yeah.
Okay, and then when it comes to like mixing and compression and all that kind of stuff, what are your go-to thoughts on that?
So for capturing, I used to record with EQ and compression on like everything I did, on the capture. So I'd commit to everything. And over the years, I figured out that I don't always know what's going to happen with the recording that I'm doing. And so because of that, I started to record things just really clean and simply where it's microphone into preamp and that's it. Maybe I'll filter off some of the low end if it makes sense for the instrument. But a lot of times I'm not even doing that. And if I want to change something tonally, I'll choose a different microphone. Now at home, you may not have the option of having a bunch of different microphones, right. So you may be kind of tied into what you're doing. But I would still say microphone, preamp, and capture it that way. And then in mixing, do your EQ moves and compression moves. Another reason for that is, like right now we have the AC going, and so there's going to be AC noise on these microphones. You can use software to remove that or to at least lessen the noise, right? But if you put a compressor on it, that compressor is going to start ducking the noise down when a sound, hits the threshold for the compressor to kick in, and that changes your noise floor and where the noise is. And so noise reduction plugins don't work the same on that compressed signal that they will on a signal that's clean. So capture everything really clean. As far as levels, like earlier we were talking about the meters and where to set your levels.
Yeah.
I like to set things so that the highest peak is between -12 and 6. If you start to get above that, you risk clipping, and once something is clipped, there's no coming back from it.
Right.
So distortion adds in a lot of high harmonic content. And like your snare drum, for example, if you have a mic on the snare and that distorts, those high frequencies are going to start to get in the way of a vocal if you have a vocalist, of a saxophone or lead instrument if you have a lead instrument, that harmonic stuff is just going to really make it hard to get distinction between the snare and your other instruments. Same for distortion on anything else. Guitars are a little different just because when you distort it and it runs through the amp, the speaker is such a significant filter that it cuts off so much of the high-end harmonic stuff. So distortion can be like more of a cool tonal option. But when you're recording, you don't get those cool tonal options by clipping digital. It's just a hard, brick wall limit, and then it's distorted and it's there on your track forever, and all the filters in the world are just going to degrade the signal in a way that you're probably not going to want it to.
Wow.
So like gain staging and setting the levels of your mic are really important.
Yeah.
Gain staging has to do with when you have a bunch of amplifiers in series. So, for example, this microphone is going to go into a preamp, and then from there it's going to go into a fader in your DAW, and from there it's going to go into another fader, your master fader at the end, right?
Yeah.
So gain staging is just setting those amplifiers at their optimal place so that your noise floor and kind of signal resolution is maintained all the way through. Setting your levels at the, with a preamp at the meter is the first step for that. So.
Yeah. It gets really, really hairy sometimes because I feel a little bit bad, but it turned out well. It totally turned out well. I was asked to record an audiobook for Rice.
Oh, cool, yeah.
And I was like, I can record in general. I can do home recording stuff, and I've made stuff that sounds pretty good. And then and this was gonna be like on Amazon, Audible, all that kind of stuff. And somebody was gonna come in here, and they did, and just read a whole book.
Right.
And then I would have to mix it and make sure it reached all levels. And then you start to get into different stuff where it's like the LUFS levels and other analogous things that I actually forget right now. And I was like, oh my God, what is that even? And there's so many little things that go into it that I would say most people are probably not aware of.
No, not unless they're geeks like we are.
I ended up, when I did that audiobook, I ended up getting this mastering software called Ozone. Are you familiar with Ozone?
Yep, Isotopes.
Isotopes, yeah.
It's a company that makes it, yeah.
Is it even good?
Yeah, I mean, and mastering is really just preparing the audio for whatever format it's going to be released to.
Right, yeah.
When it comes to music, there are creative choices that can be made in mastering that will make a significant difference to the listening experience for the audience, right? For stuff like broadcasts and audiobooks, mastering is a lot less creative and a lot more technical. There are technical requirements for the audio to be at a certain level for broadcast.
Yeah.
And if they're not within that tolerance, the broadcasters have hardware and software that will crush it down, and it may degrade your audio in a significant way if you haven't already mastered it to be at a certain place.
Yeah.
So yeah, like Ozone does all that rather well. If you're getting your music mastered, I like to use dedicated mastering engineers. There are a couple people that I'll send it to. Chris Longwood here in town, he does probably 90% of my mastering. And then Heba Kadri in New York will do a few projects every once in a while. And then James Kelly at Wire Road will do some projects every once in a while too.
Now, when you said dedicated mastering engineers, are you just describing them as such, or is that a company? They are dedicated mastering engineers,
Right.
or is that
So like if you think about your signal chain for recording, you have a microphone, you have a preamp, you may have some other hardware, and then it goes into your DAW where you can have, a billion tracks and mix it all together, bounce it down. Mastering engineers have a setup that is a lot simpler, but usually a lot higher end. So like all the money you might spend to record a full band, they'll spend just for 2 channels of audio because they're doing very fine adjustments to a wide frequency spectrum of material. And I think mastering is a specialized skill. I wouldn't say that it's voodoo. Like some people don't really know what it is or understand it, and so it seems, like, what is this magic?
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah. But it's, there are techniques that dedicated mastering engineers have developed to get certain things out of audio to prepare your audio for a format. Like if you're preparing it for vinyl, you might master it a little bit different than if you're preparing it for streaming or CD or cassette, if cassettes, come back, which they have to a tiny degree.
So what is one technical thing a master would do to a track?
So typically if you send your music to a mastering engineer, it's going to come back sounding louder and possibly a little bit clearer. And, they're using compression, maybe EQ. They might be using some MS techniques to change the sort of the stereo width, how wide things sound in your track. They might be using other techniques to get more harmonic richness out of it. So if your recording sounds a little dark and lifeless, they may do things that make it sound a little more exciting.
Gotcha.
And again, mastering is generally like very fine tweaks.
Right.
Like really, you should be really happy with your mix before you send it to get mastered.
Right.
And then they're preparing it to go to a format. So for streaming, they're going to make sure the levels are at a certain level so that when you hear it against other tracks that have been mastered on your streaming platform, there's not this wide swing in volume,
Yeah.
And the dynamic range of a jazz record is probably going to be a lot wider than the dynamic range of a pop track or a rock track,
Yeah.
Jazz and classical tend to have a wide dynamic range. Classical will have an even wider dynamic range than jazz generally.
Yeah.
And so the engineer will master, to the format for that. Vinyl has different considerations. It's a physical medium. And so like think of the low end that can happen on a kick drum, the low frequencies that can be produced there. On digital, you can let it be as big as you want it to be, and your system will be able to reproduce it. But on vinyl, there's a needle cutting, on the acetate, and if there's a big kick drum hit with a lot of low end, the needle's gonna go back and forth a lot, and that can cut into other tracks that are laying down beside. So they have to actually take some of that low end out so that the needle will cut in a certain way. That's something we don't consider when we're mixing generally. We're just trying to get balances and make it sound good.
Wow, yeah, I didn't even really think about that for vinyl, but that makes a lot of sense.
And then if you're getting it duplicated to a physical medium, mastering engineers will prepare the file that is sent to the duplication plants.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, another kind of very literal question. I'm curious, but I know a lot of people listening will be curious. You have like additive EQing versus subtractive EQing.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you start? Do you start subtractive?
I mean, it depends on how you want to change the sound and what is it that you're trying to fix or what is it you're trying to achieve, right?
Yeah.
I feel like there are two kinds of EQ moves you make. There's like corrective EQ, where maybe there's like this really loud resonant frequency in your bass, and you want to kind of tame that so that when that note comes up in the recording, it doesn't just hop out and sound louder than the other notes. So you might use an EQ to correct that problem, right? Then the other use of EQ is creative. What if you want your trumpet to sound like it's playing on a radio in 1930? You can use filters to filter out all the high end and low end and make it sound like it's coming through a very narrow, small speaker.
Yeah.
So, what do you want to do? And there can be other things where maybe your sound is dark and you want it to be a little bit brighter. So you could use an EQ to boost some high mid-range frequencies to make the sound brighter. Maybe, there's too much low end, so you would cut some low end out of your sound,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say there's a right or wrong way to do it. It's just what is it you're trying to achieve, and then that's how you'll use the tool to.
Yeah, the only problem would be is what the mistake, the common mistake would be is let's say you got a track, like you said, the bass is too muddy or there's a frequency. If you don't know what you're doing, what you might do is you might say, well, if I just boost these parts, that should go away. Or that should overlap that mistake, or it'll correct itself. But that's where the discernment comes in. A very basic discernment. Do I want it out or do I want it in?
And maybe even just understanding what the problem is to begin with, Like, when you think of a track as being muddy, what you're really hearing is a lack of clarity.
Right.
And that can be, that problem can come from a few different places, right? It could come from your room. Before the podcast, we were talking about nodes and antinodes and standing waves and the problems that those can create in your acoustic environment. All those problems get into the microphone. So if you're in a node where sound is just completely disappearing, at a certain frequency, you can use EQ and try to bump that up.
Right.
But that's not the ideal way to fix that problem. The ideal way would be to rebuild your room and make that problem not be there from the beginning. But very few people have that luxury. EQ is one way to maybe try to correct for that room problem.
We need a different room. That's it.
Yeah. Another thing that can happen is, we were talking about treating the primary reflections, so sound bouncing off the wall. There's your sound source, which right now is me talking. There's this wall where my voice is going to bounce off that wall, and then my direct sound is going to get in the microphone, and that bounce from the wall is going to get in the microphone. They come in to the mic at different times, and they create combing, a comb filter, basically, where a whole bunch of different frequencies might cancel out, depending on the distance of that wall.
Is there an anti-combing filter?
If you had a bunch of microphones, like someone like Apple might be able to come up with an algorithm that could help correct that. They kind of do it on their phones with the 3 cameras, where they can focus after the fact.
Right.
You might be able to correct for it in that way if you had 3 microphones set up.
There's pretty advanced noise canceling on phones too.
Yeah, but it's not something you and I are going to do by setting up the mic in the room. It's something that a technology company will do by making a product with all these things together.
Right.
For now, what we can do, especially when we're recording at home, is just find what's the best sounding spot in the room, and let me set up my mic there and position myself in front of in a way that we're going to get the best capture. Clarity. Another. I think acoustics play such a massive role in clarity that the best you can treat your room, you're giving yourself the best opportunity for a clear recording.
Mm-hmm.
After that, it comes down to gear. A cheap microphone is not going to be as sensitive and is going to have maybe different phase issues compared to a very, refined design, an expensive microphone. There's phase between 2 different sources, and we kind of talked about that with the standing waves where sound is reaching the same mic from 2 different times, basically, right? But even the sound that arrives here at the same time, the way that the microphone picks it up, it may capture the high frequencies in a different way than it captures the low frequencies as far as timing, and so they can get out of phase in that way as well. And then running through cheaper cables, their phase correlation is not as good as more expensive cables. Cables make a big difference. They're a filter, just like an EQ. If you listen to 3 different cables made by different companies, they'll sound different. And so cables that are made really well, the high frequencies and low frequencies are traveling along at the same time. Their phase is really good. Your sound is going to be really clear.
This is my warning to not buy the musician's gear cable at Guitar Center.
Yeah. Spend money on a good cable. You'll get a clear, better sound.
Mogami.
I have one Mogami.
Yeah,
That's it.
I love Mogami cables, but there are other companies out there that make really great cables too. Just try them out and pick the one that sounds best to you.
Josh, who do you know that can sponsor our podcast so that we can get the funds necessary to do this?
Mogami, if you're listening.
Mogami.
No, because you are saying that.
Mm.
I gotta tell you, you are drinking the cleanest water that you could be drinking right now.
Oh, how is this water so clean?
It's through this company, Epic Water Filters.
Epic Water Filters from Boulder, Colorado.
That right, exactly. So this is our plug right now. But no, we actually want to eventually be sponsored by a cool company, and we are sponsored by Epic Water Filters. So like, we have a little Houston Ensemble discount code, and these filters in the water bottle filter out literally everything.
Also, is the straw part of the filter? Like how?
The straw,
Yeah, it comes with
it's
some.
just the orange is just the filter,
Gotcha.
and the straw comes with it.
Yeah.
But
and that's their water bottle, I guess.
Yeah.
yeah. But you could, if you have a similar fitting like Nalgene or whatever, you could do it. But you could take poop water and drink it. And
Should we try this out? Should
Let's
we
do
poop in
it.
your
Let's
water
totally
bottle?
do it.
We can do it.
And then drink it?
It's gonna put Britta to shame.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that this water is very tasty, so obviously the filter is doing its job. And
That's good.
Yeah.
And being here in Houston, I would not trust the tap water. I'm not sure what you think about that.
Oh.
But
I put an inline filter in my faucet, so
Okay.
it's all filtered. Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Mhm.
But it would be so cool to eventually be sponsored by something music related.
Yeah.
But we actually had the CEO of this company on the podcast.
I bet that was
before.
fascinating. I
He's
need to go find that.
Very interesting guy. Very
Yeah.
cool guy. But
Ex Australian financier.
yeah, big
Mm.
into finances, but then just like got really big into health and blah blah blah.
When you're in
He's
the thick
still-
of Wall Street, you get disgusted, and then you do good things.
Yeah.
when you
I
have a
believe it.
podcast where your guest is standing the whole time at his
Aw.
desk, you know he's different.
Yeah.
I said, "Do you want to sit?" He said, "No, I'm gonna stand. It's just better." But okay, we're gonna end here soon because I want you to have a little time before we go. Totally different. Aliens. Are they here? Are the reptilians actually running the government? Are the Masons in control of the world? What do you think?
So I actually went to a Masonic lodge here in town.
Which one?
It's the one that's like on
Montrose?
no, it's like 610 South.
Okay.
It's the old Scottish Rite.
Oh.
Um,
Hello.
brand new building at the time. I mean, this is probably 5 years ago that I went.
Oh, yeah.
One of my friends was pledging, and he was like, "Yeah, you should come check it out." So I went to check it out, and like it was, I guess there were a bunch of lodges in town. This is a lodge that a bunch of musicians were at, and so
Really?
yeah,
Good to know.
yeah, and it was just interesting. I will say there are a lot of, or at least at the time, there were a lot of people who were very interested in the esoteric aspects,
Uh-huh.
and some of the conspiracy theory stuff, which just makes me laugh. I'm not into conspiracy theories at all, but they do have an interesting kind of system in place to basically teach you to be a better human being and person.
Right.
And so you may be familiar with like the degrees.
Yeah.
There's basically you learn these different things, and you achieve like the higher and higher degrees.
Yeah.
I didn't do it. I ended up not pledging.
They asked you to, or they
Oh, yeah,
invited
they-
you to.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. They offered.
Interesting.
At the time, it didn't make sense for me. I didn't really have time to commit to learning all the degrees, and it's also a financial
It's an
commitment.
investment,
Yeah.
especially at first.
hmm Yep. There's a financial component to it that I wasn't prepared to do either.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe I'll do it in the future, but at the time, it was just like it wasn't the time for me.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that. Who's the biggest music mason in Houston?
I have no idea. Yeah, I have no idea. Do you know?
No.
I know a few, but I don't want to point them out. I don't know if they
Yeah.
want to.
There's a very interesting Miles Davis tribute that's going on, what I've noticed here in Houston as well as in Detroit. I mean, maybe it's going on in other places. I just have friends that are part of them. They're not Masons, but They're performing at the Masonic Temple in Detroit, and as well as this place called Hughes Manor here, which I believe, based on the symbolism at Hughes Manor, is at least influenced by the Masons.
Could be.
But they have the exact same ritualistic stage set up regarding a kind of circle of candles at Detroit and here, and they've both been Miles Davis tributes, and I'm like, oh, this is very interesting.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
But
yeah, I
crazy.
mean, Masons come from every walk of life.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's a fraternity, so, you know, like my friend who pledged here in town, he moved to New York a few years ago and was able to join a lodge up there, you know, and that just gives you a chance to meet people from all different walks of life. And
yeah.
And I mean, really, that's probably where the benefit comes in is, you know, you would meet people there that you wouldn't necessarily meet, you know, at the normal places you hang out.
Yeah.
I wonder the extent to which the common Mason is aware of the esoteric writings and actually has read the esoteric writings. I know that, as with many things, that, you know, even let's say any person that goes to a church, you know, they're not sitting and thinking about theology and studying theology. You know, they're just going somewhere, right? So it could be the similar thing with Masonry. You get invited, you do your little rituals. You're like, oh, that was weird, but whatever, it's done now. Now I'm initiated. And I'm not gonna reveal anything to anyone. I know it's highly secretive, and you know, it's highly secretive. Yeah. So, but I will say, just like every fraternity has some weird rituals. Even the fraternity that I was in college had weird rituals, and they were a small fry fraternity. You know, they were small fries, but it all comes. It is all influenced by Masonry, insofar as Masonry was the first large international fraternal effort, and so a lot of the ritualistic practices kind of have seeped into the other. It's chapters.
Based on Masonic principles.
Exactly. Yeah. So that being said, what am I trying to say here without, you know?
Go read Albert Pike.
Go read Albert Pike. Go read Blavatsky, and go read Manly Hall, and go read Aleister Crowley, and go check out that.
And that's
stuff.
that. All right, we'll see everybody. Thanks for a great. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, Josh, thank you for a wonderful podcast today. Super information filled. I loved it.
Yeah, we got in deep there with some real geeky stuff for people. I hope they didn't fall asleep.
No, well, we have a lot of people who love music and especially jazz who listen to this, so I think it'll be really cool. Appreciate you taking the time. Very awesome.
Thank you for having me, yeah.
And so you were the 48th episode, just FYI. 48.
Yeah.
It's a good number.
That's a great number.
The number of man and the eternal number.
Oh, I
number
see.
of man.
Are you saying 4?
4 is the number of man.
Okay, gotcha.
In some archetypes, in like old literature, for
example.
Also,
666 is the number of man. 6 electrons, 6 protons, 6 neutrons.
That's what
carbon.
Yes, and then some say it's the number of the beast, and some say it's this or that. Well, there's a lot of meanings.
Number of the Earth.
Yeah, 48's a good number.
48's nice.
Yeah.
All right.
I appreciate you guys having me. Thanks.
Everybody, we'll see you next time. This was Josh Applebee. We will link him in the description. Make sure if you need recording stuff, go to Wire Road Studios. It's a wonderful place. They may be booked up, but it's worth a shot. And
or you can reach out to me directly.
Or Josh directly. Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.